Hi, thanks for joining the session. I hope Vishwan is joining soon. So let's do a bit of a recap in terms of what we've covered so far. I think this unit is quite interesting because there's a lot of reading to do, and this unit provides most of the information that we all already know, and we have that information because we use IT on a day in, day out basis, whether it's in personal life, professional life, or work life. So in the first outcome, we have basically looked at understanding, how IT has changed our lives in terms of understanding, how IT is part of our lives, both personal and professional. And when we say, sometimes we hear the term that, people are struggling to maintain a balance between work and personal life is because of the heavy usage of IT, whether it's social media, whether it's computers, whether it's consumption of media, which is through YouTube or some of the channels. We're having a lot of content being driven into our lives, and that is why I think to a certain extent to look at studying this unit to see how the developments in IT is actually having an impact on society. So in the first learning outcome, we looked at understanding how it is shaped in the last 50 years. How IT and technologies and access to technology through various devices have actually changed our interaction with machines, automation, and to a certain extent now cloud computing based products which make us which actually make data available at a touch of a button on any kind of a device that we use. The other things that we looked at was we kind of recapped in terms of what kind of key innovations from an IT perspective have actually made our lives easier. So when we look at banking, we look at ATM in particular, we look at electric cars. So what we've done is basically in the presentation captured some of these innovations which have made our lives easier. Things like products which are being sold online, they're not barcoded, then it's going to be very difficult to differentiate and identify these products. So manufacturers and e-retailers like Amazon, Flipkart. You look at a lot of these international retailers like eBay. You look at one of the biggest retailers in Europe, which is PC World and Currys. In the US, you look at Computer Buy. These retailers, you look at Walmart. They have lots of products, millions and millions of products which they sell online. And if they didn't have a technological barcode and scanners, it would have been very difficult to get to label these products. Obviously, we've seen cell phones, the advent of telecom and handsets in terms of smartphones. So we had phones in the early 1900s. Then we had what you call mobile phones in the early 90s. They were quite big, huge, chunky, expensive. But how quickly have you see the form factor of these phones have reduced over the years? And then with the coming in of internet in 1995 rather, what we do see proliferation of a lot of websites which allow us to look at getting access to data through the internet at a touch of a button. And there are lots of things which have eased out and changed over the years because of that. If you look at one example that I'll give you here, which has made some of the businesses redundant as well. If you look at digital cameras, you look at cameras essentially. Cameras were one of the key things that Kodak introduced in the early 1900s. Then we had the cameras which had films. Over a point in time, we had digital cameras, SLR cameras. But now you see camera as a market has totally disappeared because cameras have become integrated into the smartphone. And what we do see with the integration of technology happening and the things becoming smaller and products becoming 3-in-1, 4-in-1, 5-in-1. So you have a phone, you have a computer, you have a camera, you have an email, everything possible. Some of the technologies, or products which have been used for a number of decades have become obsolete because of the, advancement in technology. When you look at e-commerce website, you will see that when we used to book holidays 25 years back, 20 years back, we used to go to a standard travel and tour operator to say, I want to go here, can I book a ticket? Or, you want to book a ticket for traveling on, going from any sort of destination to other using railway ticket, airline ticket. Today, if you see, very few countries, very few cities have travel agents. Travel agents have disappeared because everything is now online, and you can book a ticket online. What has happened is, as you can see, the advancement in technology is making some of the businesses obsolete as well. Then we look at advent of GPS technology, and in some of the slides that I've covered, we looked at how technological disruption. Why we say disruption is because we see the space at which the technology is changing and is making some of the things obsolete, and that pace is increasing every year because of the advancements in automation and new discoveries or in terms of products being done and making some of the things available to us in terms of information, data, knowledge, and a touch of a button. So the first LO was primarily focused on understanding how IT has changed our lives. And then we looked at some of the assessment criteria to understand, when we look at personal side of things, social networking, when we look at education side of things, e-learning, when we look at online shopping, we had only brick and mortar model wherein we had to go to retail shops to buy products or get products. But now today you're able to get products or do shopping predominantly online. Job market has changed entirely. You no longer go to a recruitment consultant and things like that. You basically search for jobs online. And these are changes which have come across in our personal life because of the advent of technology. And then we also looked at what impact it is having on us. So sometimes we do see positive and sometimes we see negative impact. One of the things, I don't know whether you have read, but the negative effects of screen time. In terms of, because there are so many types of screens now that we use, what is happening is that there are lots of research and studies which are coming in because we use computers, we use laptops, we use tablets, we use e-book readers, we use smartphones. A lot of things are now being calculated in terms of screen time. How much time are you spending online? Whether you access information through a laptop, smartphone, tablet, e-book reader, these are all basically what are called screens. So what they're saying is that this has also become important because there are positives and negative effects of looking at usage of technology, and that is what we covered in learning outcome 1. Is that okay?
Yes, sir.
So are you in agreement with all this?
Yes.
Anything that you would like to add?
Right now, no, sir.
Okay. So let's go to learning outcome 2. Now, in learning outcome 2, we basically looked at some of the, after understanding how IT has changed our lives, what are the advancements in IT which have happened. In the second learning outcome, we understood issues which IT is creating in society. And these issues could be, law and legislation which is getting introduced because if you recall, and if you just look at this as a scenario that 20 years back there was no internet. So obviously there was nothing online, there were no websites, there were, even if the internet was present, it was present primarily as a, network which the military used in the US, and that was called ARPANET and DARPANET. They were networks created by the Department of Defense in the US to basically share files or share information. And when you look at these two networks, the concept of this network was taken up by Tim Berners-Lee, and he created, internet by writing or creating HTML code. And this hypertext markup language led to the creation of something called internet. And this internet then became available in public domain. That means you and me could use, applications and create applications rather than just the military usage side of things. So this was an example of how, information was shared amongst different computers or mainframes, from IBM in the early 70s. When we look at the usage of, technology to share files, information, intelligence data amongst the two US agencies, ARPANET and DARPANET. That is why they were called, they were basically, DARPANET stands, primarily for the department which looked at, defense research. So that is why it was called DARPANET, so Defense Advanced Research Project Agency. So they use networks and they use computers. But Tim Berners-Lee, when he created internet, what tended to happen is that this led to the widespread proliferation of internet, which meant PCs became, useful tools for us to access information, and that access to information led to the creation of law, legislation, and today we have the modern day concept of something called digital citizenship. So everybody has a moral responsibility, ethical responsibility to, consume, share, and distribute data, but in a very meaningful and in a safe manner. So the three pillars of digital citizenship that we studied, which have now started to come across as a framework for safety, literacy, and responsibility. And then over the years, they have been expanded into the 9 elements, and we discussed these 9 elements to understand how they are, how firms are now being asked to adhere to these guidelines when they, create data, store data, retrieve data, distribute data, consume data, or say for example, even observe data and translate it knowledge. Looked at a bit of an idea in terms of how digital literacy or digital citizenship is actually coming across in the European countries, and there's a framework around this. So we looked at information rights management and some of the law and legislation which has now been introduced over the years, the code of ethics, and they were all covered in learning outcome too. So after understanding advancements in IT, we went to understanding how these advancements in IT led to law, legislation, and regulation, because there is so much data that is being produced and consumed on a daily basis that if I think if I remember mentioning that there are 200 million, tweets which are done on a daily basis. So average, how many tweets were done on per day, in 2018? If you look at doing that search, it says, about 500 million tweets, were done, on a daily basis. So when you look at some of these statistics in terms of how much data is being sent, 200 million tweets, was the last I knew. But you see today there are 500 million tweets which are done every day. I don't know how many text messages are sent across the world, but there are billions and billions of gigabytes of data which is being produced every day. In order to maintain, monitor, consume, distribute that data, there was a need for legislation, and this legislation has come in the form of laws, and those laws are around digital citizenship, cyber laws, IT laws, code of ethics which have been created, and that's what we have studied, in learning outcome too. And some of these things, translate into when data is created, how to set rights, right, which is through information. That is what we studied in learning outcome two. Now, learning outcome three, what we are going to do is when we look at studying this particular unit, we are going to focus on understanding in a bit more detail the legal, ethical, and regulatory issues in IT. And that is where, from a context of UK, what I've done is I have created this presentation. We'll understand the key concepts first. What are the issues? What are the issues? First is what is issue. Then we look at legal issues in IT. Then we also look at ethical issues in IT, regulatory issues in IT, and then using an organization. I picked up Ernst & Young, which is one of the top 4 accounting firms in the world, and we look at picking up one organization, and with that organization we will study how does the organization get impacted when they look at the implementation of legal legislation and regulation within the day-to-day functioning of the organization, and that will bring us nicely to look at completing this unit. Is that okay? Vishwin, are you able to hear us? So he's muted, but I hope you're able to hear us, Vishwin. That's fine. So let's get into understanding some of these key concepts first, and then what we'll do is we'll go into the various assessment criteria, to cover, the learning outcome 3. Now, before I start, what I want to do is I'm going to try and follow this in a bit of a haphazard manner. I'll do some slides first and then some slides later. And the idea would be to try and define and understand what are issues. Okay, let's look at what is how do you define an issue? Let's look at what are issues first. Why do we talk about issues? Any ideas? What are issues? Why do we look at discussing issues in IT in particular? Any idea in terms of the definition of the word issue? Then
issues are just an barrier
Right, okay. So when you look at just the word issue, what you say is okay. I think what I would say is if you just look at the word issue, what is issue? Issue is basically nothing but a problem. It is something which is wherein we've got stuck. Say, for example, if you're driving down the road and your GPS doesn't give you the right directions, what we do is we get stuck. So if you get stuck in any place, or if there is a problem that you face at any given point in time while you're doing a particular work, what it means is that you have an issue. Now, the reason why we look at issues within IT is that as what has happened is as IT has grown in terms of when we say adoption of IT. A lot of people, today when you look at doing a job, there is no way an employer will employ you if you do not have IT skills. Now, when they say IT skills, they look at PC, you look at Windows, usage of some software like Microsoft Office and stuff. And this is very important for you to understand that if you do not have knowledge in this, then at some stage it will create issues for you while you are working. Because if you're not able to understand and use email or send emails or use MS Office, then there's an issue that either the employer has to get you trained on using IT, using a PC, and if you don't have that basic knowledge, then obviously it creates an issue that, okay, you're recruiting somebody who does not have the requisite knowledge, and they need to be either look at training or obviously you need to hire and fire them. So a practical example when we look at issues coming in IT would be that from a job perspective nowadays, because of the changes in technology and everything is done using PCs nowadays, whether it's small business, large business, medium business, when you look at public business, private businesses, organizations, they all use IT. And when we use the word IT, we use a big term called information technology, because within the information technology, you have hardware and software. When you look at hardware and software, and if you have good knowledge of hardware and software, then you are able to work on things and you're able to basically complete things or have no problems. But the moment you have problems, we call them as issues, and these issues get sorted out. Now, from an IT perspective, a simple example would be you go into the office in the morning and your PC isn't starting. So there's a problem in booting of the PC. Windows isn't loading. So what is it? It's an issue that your PC isn't working, and because of which your work hasn't started. Correct? So when we look at issues in computing, the reason why we look at these issues now coming up is because there are lots of different types of hardware and software which are being used, and the usage of these hardware and software sometimes can lead to problems, and these problems are what are called issues in IT. Now, what we don't want to do is we don't want to generically study issues. In terms of issues, we want to study what are legal, ethical, and regulatory issues in IT. So in this context, it is important for us to understand what are these three types of issues which every organization has to look at when they employ or deploy, rather not employ, they deploy IT infrastructure. It could be PCs, servers, internet, some sort of networking, anything which is connected to a network will require what is called, IT infrastructure. So there are three types of issues that we can face: legal, ethical, regulatory. Hi, Ray. Hi. So good.
What?
So these three kind of issues can actually be
Any food? Any what? Any food? No.
facing. Now, within IT issues, we need to look at issues which are going to be data protection. We need to be looking at issues which are, piracy, for example. We need to be looking at issues which are copyright. And to a certain extent, what we want to be able to do is, we want to be able to look at issues which are related to problems that we face. Things which are related to things like, sometimes PC not working, software not working. So this learning outcome 3 will actually focus on understanding these three different types of issues that we want to study.
Can you hear me?
I can hear you, Rishwin. You're a bit late for the class.
I know. I was trying to figure that out.
Okay, no worries.
So sorry.
No worries. Thanks for joining in. So we've just started the learning outcome 3, and what we're discussing is, the key concepts of what we need to study. In terms of what are issues, how do we define an issue first? But issue, because it's a broader term, issue means a problem, but it's a broader term. What we want to narrow it down to is to understand what kind of issues an IT professional working within the sector can face when you work within an organization or when you work with IT equipment. And there are three types of issues that we're discussing. And these three types of issues, there are lots of them. There could be different types of issues. We will discuss in detail. Now, some, research says 5, some says 10, but they are all kind of categorized around 3 different types. So one is legal, the second is ethical, and the third is regulatory. Now, there are environmental issues also coming up because we need to recycle IT nowadays. Some of the equipment that we use, like these monitors, have certain components or elements in it which could be detrimental to environmental, have detrimental effect on environment, like the water table, for example. Certain chemicals like arsenic, cadmium, nickel, if they leak into the water table, can make the water table poisonous and can destroy water, and make it unfit for consumption. So environmental issues are also becoming important in general because we have finite resources, and because of the large-scale development of IT and the usage of PCs and PC-related infrastructure, what we also need to be able to do is ensure that the environment is also protected while we are kind of recycling some of this stuff. Now, since we've understood the basic, definition of the word issue, which means a problem, we need to relate it to the kind of issues or problems that you as an IT professional will face. You work within an organization or you work with IT infrastructure. Having understood that, what we want to be able to do at some stage would be to get into some of these issues like data protection, look at misuse, computer misuse, look at software piracy, we look at things like copyright issues or intellectual property, we look at environmental issues, and obviously issues related to the moral use of technology. Now, what is moral use of technology? Moral use of technology would be something like if you go to a library sometimes you will see that most libraries now have PCs, wherein as a student you can go into a library, you can also do online research. Now, because these are PCs on the public network, that means this is not your personal PC that you use, but these PCs can be used by any number of people within the library. What we need to be able to do is look at some moral issues around that usage. That means if you use the PC, you need to make sure that you do not go on to certain sites which are not, say for example, favorable when you're using the PC in the library. You make sure your passwords, for example, are not stored, or if somebody is by default, saved the password, then you kind of clear the cache out before you start using it. Now, these are issues related to morality. That means to respect data privacy, respect privacy of the other users. And sometimes you see within libraries what tends to happen is that there are small cubicles which are made, and these cubicles kind of give you a bit of a certain personal area or a private area to be able to work and research without others having to come into it. So moral issues would be if you're in the library and there are a number of PCs and you are one of them, it's expected that you adhere to certain ethics of morality, saying that you're not peeping into somebody else who's sitting next to you and what they're doing, or with your prying eyes looking at the other people in terms of what data they are researching on, and these are issues around morality in terms of usage of IT. So this is something that you will also see within offices, and that's why when you see a flat organization or a hierarchical structure, a lot of people within the office sitting, they're expected that when you are speaking with somebody, you're not looking into or peering into their PC in terms of what is open or what the person is browsing. So we need to study a lot of these different things which we need to be aware of, and these are things that we are going to be covering in learning outcome 3 under the broad categorization of issues under ethical, legal, and regulatory issues. Is that okay?
Yeah.
Any questions on this so far? Okay. So what I want to look at is, this is a slide which I should actually I'll move it further up so that we can do a further discussion to say that can you think of some issues related to IT when you use a PC or a device which connects you to the internet? Rishwin, can you think of certain issues that you face when you use IT or a device that is connected to the internet?
What kind of problems I face?
Sorry, looking at?
What's the question? What kind of problems I face?
Yeah, so I think keeping in mind when we look at issues, What is the issue? Have you faced an issue while using IT or your PC?
Yeah, I won't be able to log into certain websites.
Right, okay. Are you sitting outside the restaurant? Let me ask you this question because there's a lot of background noise which is coming, obviously. It looks like, are you sitting in a market or, whereabouts are you?
Just at Starbucks.
The way that you can move into a bit of a quieter place because I can get to understand what you're saying, but there's a lot of background noise coming as well.
Oh, you can hear background noise?
Yes.
1 second. Sure. Zoom out and mute. Yeah, I'm really sorry. Sorry about that.
Listen, can you think of any issues that you faced when you're using IT or computing? Within in your case,
What about?
yeah, go ahead, Rashmi.
Sorry, what about right now? Are you good right now?
I think there is I can hear a lot of people talking in the background, especially kids.
Oh, seriously, what about right now? Can you, would it right now be okay, or?
Yeah, your sound is okay now. If you continue with that sound, then that's okay. So my question to you again was, what kind of issues have you faced when you use IT or IT related or computing related equipment?
You're talking about internet?
Internet, yes.
Well, basically, there's certain websites you can't access. Like for me, I'm trying to access. Like I'm right now in Asia, and in Asia you cannot access certain U.S. websites. So that's the problems I face.
That's correct. So one of the issues, if I have to just rephrase what you face sometimes, is that you do not have access to certain
websites. Yeah, you're right.
Websites. So this could be an issue, and sometimes you have to look at using CDN servers, or you have to use jump sites essentially to be able to read, because certain IPs or certain types of IP addresses from certain countries do not give you access to the internet or websites in another country, like in China, for example. Google does not, your Gmail or most of the emails do not work. So China has a Weibo as their search engine, which is like a Google in China, but sometimes you will see some of these websites are blocked, and this is because the government has a control on the on the World Wide Web. We can implement certain policies which forces users to use Weibo as against Google as a search engine. So this could be an issue, yes, because it prohibits you from accessing information or getting hold of information that you need in some cases. Nitin, can you think of an issue that you faced?
When I'm in desktop, one day I faced legal issue, and when I reached to all it was no technical issue. What happened? My signal battery was off, so my computer clock was reset. And as the computer clock was reset, some plugins from the browser they are not supporting for my voice.
Okay.
They are detecting text so clear that the president said, which calls to the legal issues that you are not in the same time zone and you can't text them.
Right. So what you said is absolutely correct. So I was let me do this. I wasn't able to hear you clearly because there's a bit of an echo, or maybe you're too close to the microphone when you're speaking, so your voice is coming jumbled. So this is a bit of an IT issue that we are having a webinar session right now, and what is the issue that I'm getting to face is that I'm not able to hear you clearly because the voice isn't coming quite clear. So this could be an issue that I face. The other thing that you mentioned was, in terms of so if you type it out, I would get to understand because I couldn't understand what you were saying. So if we look at issues, I'm having a bit of an issue right now with, voice communication because your voice is your voice is not clear. So this is a bit of an issue, but this gives me an example that, when we talk about using IT in general, my point here is that I want to discuss what kind of issues do we face. So as of now, we are facing a technological issue.
Look at you, man.
Issue which is not allowing Nitin probably, or the voice modulation which is happening at that end is not being transferred or transmitted over in the webinar, and that is what is a technological issue. What has been highlighted was, again, it is a restriction issue. It is restricted because of certain websites that he's trying to access from Asia. When he says, he's trying to access it from Malaysia. In general, those websites or IP addresses could be blocked. That's why he's not able to access all the websites in the. That is something which is an issue which highlights restriction, and that could be because of government related things. Like I give you an example of China, and we look at Weibo. So in China, the government regulates the internet. There is not much internet freedom available to users in China, and when we look at that as an aspect, it is to do with regulation or regulatory issue. So any other type of issue that we can look at. So it's good that we've been able to recollect today two different types of issue. One is regulatory, which Vishwan has highlighted, and what Nitin you highlighted is a technological issue. Any other issues can you think of that we face when we use IT, or when we basically look at, using any type of IT equipment or infrastructure? Can you think of any other issues?
License period when the software is not allowed to use. This when I was using Windows.
Nitin, I think my request to you would be if you type. I think your voice comes.
Okay.
If you stay away from the microphone slightly, I think it will be much better.
Okay.
Try now.
You can hear me now?
I can hear you, but I think your voice is coming, quite quite not clear. So, type out what do you think is the issue? Could you type it out? What do you think any other issue that you can think of? All right. Okay. So that's fine. Then I'll give you some hints. So first of all, when we talk about technology, we have covered that technological issues. We've talked about regulatory issues. I think some of the other issues that we want to look at are issues related to, when you get a lot of emails, coming to you, and that would be something related to a context called spamming. Now, this is a usage-related issue because there are lots of emails which people send across for marketing and, or obviously soliciting sales or selling of their products and services. And sometimes if these emails come across to you without you being subscribed, or, you're being a subscriber to those emails, then in that case, this becomes a usage issue because you're getting a number of emails from a source that you have not subscribed or asked for, and that becomes a usage-related issue, and that could be termed as something called spamming. Now, that generally happens when we look at a lot of companies, organizations, and, marketing their products and services. Then what you highlighted is when you're using Windows, some software do not work. So what you have said is after license finishes, that is an issue which is a very good point, and that issue is related to something called piracy. So if you use software and if you have to buy it and pay for it, and there's a subscription, and the subscription actually expires and you are not able to use it, then morally and ethically you should uninstall that software, because that relates to something called software piracy. If you continue using it by hacking it or by other means, then it is highlighting an ethical issue that you do not understand that this leads to something called software piracy. That's also a different type of issue. So we have covered 3 or 4 different types. We looked at issues which you mentioned, which is regulatory issue, technological issue, usage issue, and then we have looked at issues which are related to in general hardware technology, or software piracy. Now, this is something that we will also expand into something called intellectual property. Now, when you look at Microsoft, and why do you think Donald Trump President Donald Trump is actually going after China because they've been fighting software piracy in China and developing countries like India and countries in Africa like Nigeria, Tanzania, Kenya, is because it leads to software being used illegally, and that contributes to something called piracy. Now, because of this, companies like Microsoft or some of the other companies like Adobe, they use millions and billions of dollars because people are actually using their products but not paying for the subscription or usage of that product. And that is something which is covered under what is called intellectual property, and the misuse of intellectual property, which is a code or a piece of software which is being used for without being paid for it, or is being duplicated without having the user rights or the rights under the Information Rights Management (IRM), and then being sold separately, or illegally, would constitute to something called software piracy, and that falls under something called intellectual property. Now, one of the other things that we also look at is type of issues is when we look at hackers and we look at viruses, look at bots, we look at these kind of things which unethically try and secure information from your machine or from your PC. So that is also it's an issue because there are people around the world who are continuously hacking into systems. And I think if you've read in the last couple of days, even the President Donald Trump has actually raised, the level of, I think he's declared an emergency, in terms of IT hacking in the US by China and China-related companies. So this was in the news, and I think Trump declares national emergency to protect US networks from foreign espionage or from cyber threats against the US. So if you see this, these are also issues, but these are related or falling into the boundary of something called ethical and regulatory issues. What I was trying to reach in this discussion that we had with you guys was to try and understand the different types of issues. How do we classify these issues into the 3 or 4 categories that we would study in learning outcomes 3? So when you look at ethical issues, we're looking at software piracy, we're looking at intellectual property, hacking. When you look at technological issues, we're looking at not being able to access websites. Those are which are primarily regulatory issues. And when we look at issues related to not being able to access a particular thing, or the PC not working, like Nathan you mentioned, then in those cases there will be issues which are technological issues, but they will fall into what is what we call is that you paid for the software, but the software isn't working or it's not installing properly, and there will be some issues which are related to you not being able to use the subscription because you paid for it, but they will fall under something called legal issues because you might want to go after the company and say, okay, you paid so much money, we've asked for these services, but they are not being delivered, and because of which there could be repercussions in terms of you either suing the company, and these issues could be related to something called, legal issues. So in general, when we look at learning outcome 3, what we are looking at primarily understanding is the types of issues, how they can be categorized across this, and then what are the codes of ethics and how these issues can be dealt with. And what has happened is over the years, as the technology has advanced, there are lots of organizations which have created the code of ethics and regulation, and that is what we're going to study in the assessment criteria. So if I now go to the first assessment criteria, it talks about evaluation of current legal, ethical, and regulatory issues. Now, there are lots of studies which have been done, and because, as I mentioned earlier, that there is a lot of data being produced, because of the use of technology, we need to have some sort of code of conduct or some sort of a manual, and those are now defined in something called the code of ethics within the IT. Now, there are various codes of ethics, and in the last learning outcome, we studied the code of ethics with IEEE, which is one of the organizations. We looked at ACM, which is another organization which creates the code, and these are generally now followed across, I would say, when we look at, globally, wherever IT infrastructure is deployed. So the ACM code of conduct, define issues which, occur, but they give you solutions to look at primarily the code of ethics and how does an IT professional conduct when they do their day-to-day job. and they have defined certain principles which have now come across to be known as something called the ECM Code of Ethics and Professional Conduct. So we will look at some of these now from a perspective of understanding the assessment criteria and the tasks which are there. I think the first and most important thing is there is lots of information, and when you see some of this information being sent across, you see that sometimes in emails that you receive, you also receive a legal disclaimer. And what I would do is just point out, say, one or two as an example, and that will give you an idea in terms of when we say legal disclaimers, what does that mean? So let's look at, now, this is an email, for example, which is coming to me, and obviously, these are emails which are unsolicited emails which are coming. Now, what happens is, if you see, because of the changes in law, in the EU in particular, you cannot send out emails if the subscriber or the person is not actually subscribed to getting those emails. So here, in this email, if you see, when we talk about legal, ethical, and regulatory issues, this is a regulatory issue that when you look at every email which is coming out as a marketing email, needs to have something called a link to click here to view privacy details. When I click on this, you will see that the company has an obligation to explain their privacy policy. And this is covered under something called regulatory issue. Now, if an email comes to you in the EU in particular, and you do not have a privacy policy or an option for you to opt out from that email, then you can actually go back to something called the Information Commissioner's Office, and this, and make a complaint against the organization which is sending these emails to you, and that organization can be fined up to £250,000 or euros for spending across unsolicited emails or marketing emails. Now, this to a certain extent becomes a regulatory issue, but under regulatory issue, where would we categorize this? We would categorize this as something called spamming, because you're getting an email which is unsolicited, and that unsolicited email, can invite a regulation or a regulatory complaint from your side to the ICO. Say that, boss, this is an email that I don't want, and I have unsubscribed from that email. So it says, if you no longer wish to receive this email, Galaxy, please click here. So when I click on this, it will immediately take my email off from the database and says you're no longer subscribed to receive this email. Now, even after this, if I receive an email, I can make a complaint, and when I make a complaint, it becomes a legal issue, and ICO, the organization in the UK, looks into it under the GDPR Act, and then can actually fine the organization, from an aspect of saying that you are spamming or you're sending emails which are, unsolicited emails to users, selling your products and services. Now, that is where what we look at is, this is something which is related to your assessment criteria 3.1, and it talks about how do we deal with these issues, what is the minimum requirement which the provider or the company has to follow, whether it's things of whether it's related to publishing their privacy policy, how they collect cookies and use that data, and at the same point in time, give you the option to unsubscribe when they send out these emails, or marketing or product services emails. Now, there are lots of legislations in the UK in particular which have been created over the years, and these legislations include, all these acts. So what I'm going to do is send you a particular handout which will cover all these acts in a bit more detail. But the idea here is why these legislations have been created from time to time over the years is that as advancements in ITs have happened, and computers, if you look at in the early 1990s, we had Pentium, we had 386, 486, we had Pentium. So there's a Computer Misuse Act created in 1990 because there were some ethics around which how PCs could be used, what they could be used for. When you buy a PC or when you use an IT equipment, you're not using it for hacking. Some parts of that are covered under the Misuse Act. Then there is Consumer Protection Act, Data Protection Act, and some of the other acts which have been introduced over the years, which actually regulate how you use IT infrastructure, and when you are using, deploying, or using and deploying IT infrastructure, whether it's any type, networks, PCs, laptops, tablets, mobile phones, any sort of telecom equipment, you have to ensure that you are adhering to this important legislation, which is important because it allows the use of information, storage of information, but it kind of ring fences what is called the legal issues, the ethical issues, and shows that you are, as a company, as an organization, as a business, you are following this regulation to ensure that the data which has been produced, used or distributed follows all this compliance. Is that okay?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Now, what I've also done in one or two specific slides for covering the assessment criteria 3.1 is it is a wide, ranging topic. And when we look at this particular topic, there is a full chapter which I'm going to send you a link on, which is going to give you a bit more detail. But what I want to do from a perspective of covering it now, the idea would be to try and summarize why are ethical issues and what are the most important type of ethical organizations face. So the first type that we look at is intellectual property. The second is software piracy, and the third is outsourcing. So I put some slides in to make you understand the concept of what is intellectual property. Now, if I come up with a unique idea, and that unique idea leads to the creation of a product or a service, like Apple, for example, has created the iPhone. Now they have patented that idea or that product or that concept because it is something they've spent millions and billions of dollars in terms of research and development to create that product. Now nobody can copy that product or copy their ideas and create a phone and say that, okay, here we go, this is a phone that we've created. If they copy most of these things which have been which are unique or very specific to an iPhone, then it leads to something called infringements. That means they are blatantly copying things somebody has created and then using it in their product to basically sell it to the consumers. And when you have that kind of a breach happening, this is something which is a breach related to called intellectual property. So intellectual property relates to creation of ideas which businesses work on for years and years and spend lots of money in terms of research and development. But if an individual or an organization copies that idea without paying a royalty or some sort of loyalty in terms of return investment, then this is called breaching of intellectual property rights. And this, as you can see, is an ongoing constant battle between Samsung and Apple, as an example. Apple says that Samsung has in the Galaxy phone copied a lot of features the iPhone introduced, and because of which Samsung was fined and they were asked to pay, I think about $680 million in damages to Apple. But they have now settled these, differences outside court because Samsung gives a certain amount of royalty for certain patents or usages which have been created in the iPhone, which they've copied into or introduced into their phones. Now, we've discussed very briefly earlier about software. I've discussed very briefly about what is the concept of something called software piracy. Now, Microsoft loses, Adobe as a company loses a lot of, revenue internationally because a lot of places are able to copy and use the software without having to pay for it. And that is basically intentional and unintentional use of that software, which is basically nothing but piracy. That means you're using somebody's products and services without, having to pay for those products and services, and that amounts to software piracy. Now, Microsoft uses up to, $3 to $4 billion every year in China and India alone because they, because in India and China, obviously, a lot of products, especially the softwares like Windows, are pirated and then used on a number of PCs, preloaded on a number of PCs, and then they are not being paid for in terms of the usage. And that is where, it amounts to software piracy. That means somebody's product, which is copyright and not being licensed properly, is being used by other users without having to pay for it. And that will be basically nothing but software piracy. Now, one of the things that we've seen in the last 10, 15 years is that, as an example I would give, India has become an IT superpower because a lot of outsourcing of IT-related, services is happening to India, especially in Bangalore, for example. You look at in Pune in particular. Now, the outsourcing is a concept wherein a lot of companies abroad, especially in the US and the European region, are looking at finding cheaper ways to be able to provide those services to customers based in the UK, in the European Union, and in the US. And this concept of outsourcing has also led to a lot of frauds or a lot of breaches of data. When you look at a lot of call centers which are now set up in Philippines, India, Thailand, or majority of English-speaking countries, sometimes you see that we get to hear that there are data breaches which have happened, that credit card details have been stolen or they've been misused to buy products and things like that. And that is a negative effect of outsourcing of IT. So we do see that some of these things do happen from time to time, and here the service providers are not adhering to something called certain code of conduct in terms of ensuring that data cannot be stolen from call centers, USB ports should be disabled, employees should be frisked, or should not have the ability to be able to copy or store data when they are dealing with third-party data, which is sensitive in terms of, say, financial services, your credit card, banking, and things like that. So this also is a big issue as far as ethical issue is concerned, that when people work within the sector, they need to ensure that, when they deal with third-party data, they are ensuring that they are respecting and using the data in a way wherein it does not fall into wrong hands, and also it does not, is not misused, for commercial benefits or purposes. Is that okay?
Yes, sir.
Any questions on this so far? Any questions on this? Yeah.
Sir, you say about the outsourcing issues.
Yeah.
I have one query. The example you have given there related to service sector industry. There is some issues occur in the IT sector.
Issues, there could be issues related to IT also in outsourcing. Sometimes you see that there are lots of centers, for example, which reroute calls after the working hours to Far Eastern countries. So what happens is a lot of banks provide 24/7 services, a lot of e-commerce website provide 24/7 services. But what happens is during the normal functioning hours between 9 to 5 or 8 to 6 p.m., the calls are answered in the UK call centers. But after that, what tends to happen is the calls get rerouted to, say India or Philippines or Vietnam, in terms of, handling customer inquiries during the late hours in the evening. Now, sometimes you could have technological issues because of outsourcing, because if the network fails, or if the VPN, the virtual private network through which the calls are transferred overseas, and do not, get you a resolution, then because of the issues that you face on technological failures like network failure or the call not being rerouted, could be also issues that you face because of outsourcing, because there the issue which has happened is because of technological failure. The platform fails, the calling system fails. You're ringing, but when you've called up, it keeps on ringing. No service agent is actually, or the customer agent is picking up the call. Like you normally have about 4 rings, as a practice in all call centers, they pick up the call within 4 rings. But if it's going beyond 4 rings and nobody's picking up, then it's a bit of an issue. That means there are not enough agents available to be able to field those inquiries, and that could be an issue which is coupled with technological, but also in terms of short staffing, which is because of outsourcing. So these are issues that you can see which get faced, when we talk about the concept of, ethical issues in information technology or IT, and outsourcing has become one of the major issues that we see most organizations facing when they are sending work abroad. Outsourcing is nothing but sending work abroad. That means they're it could be because of various reasons, cheap labor. It could be because of, say, for example, economics in terms of cost and value. It could also be in terms of out of hours in particular. So companies do not function or work in 3 shifts sometimes, but if they offer services which are seen to be like 24/7, when you look at big companies like Amazon, you look at Walmart, you look at, for example, Apple, they have 24/7 call centers. So even if you call in the midnight, their calls are being fielded by agents which are based in different countries across the world. But, they offer the same service or customer support which the company provides for different products. And if they are outsourced, that means if it's not an Apple employee dealing with that service, but it's been outsourced to a vendor, then in that case, that would be an outsourcing issue. And if the calls do not get connected, get dropped off, sometimes you will see that when you do these calls, what the call center agent would essentially do is take your number just in case to say, if you do get disconnected, can I just take your number so I can call you back? And those are issues which are related to outsourcing and, technology. Now, let's quickly look at, considering what is the importance of these ethical issues. So when you look at the word ethic and we define ethic, ethics is related to morality. That means you're following some moral principles to be able to self-govern yourself, or when you use, IT equipment. It could also be if you're working as a manager or a supervisor, you're governing the workings of some of your employees, and they would all fall, within what is called the ethical guidelines that we need to implement, when we look at usage of IT. So what I want to be able to do in assessment criteria 3.2 is the idea would be to try, and cover, the importance of these ethical issues specifically related to information technology. Now, one of the points that we need to understand is because of the invention of a lot of new technologies and the capabilities that they're bringing, what is happening is that we are facing more and more different types of issues, and these issues primarily can be classified under what is called the ethical, in terms of ethical terms or ethical guidelines. Now, one of the things that we would cover in particular would be very briefly looking at the use of these ethical guidelines to solve problems. Why do we have these code of conducts? Why do we have these rules? Why do we have the rule book, policies, procedures? Is because if you have a problem, then there is a way to, solve that problem by looking into that code of conduct or the guidelines which have been created, which have been actually created because of issues which are cropping up because of technology, or because of outsourcing, or the aspects that we've discovered like intellectual property, things we've discussed like software piracy and things like that. Now, when we look at the responsibility of ethics, what we look at is the 3 P's of technology when we look at ethics. So one is privacy, the second is property, and the third is appropriate use. Now, these are classified as the 3 P's primarily of, technology or IT in particular. So the first one, when I talk about privacy, is I'm looking at protecting the privacy of myself and of others if I'm using using or producing data. The second is property. So I will protect the property and respect the property of others. That means when you work within an office and you're given certain equipment like a mobile phone or a PC, or if you work within an office and you are in a sales or marketing job and you're given a car by the company, then you respect and use the property or the equipment given to you in a responsible manner. And the third would be appropriate use, which is primarily saying that you're going to be able to use this technology for constructive purposes to further the business, achieve the goal or the objectives which the organization has set for you when you work, for a business. So these are the 3 P's of technology ethics that we need to be able to know. And then what we need to do is, using an example, explain these 3 P's primarily for meeting the assessment criteria 3.2. So what you can do is you can pick up software piracy as an example to explain that, and then that would be easy enough to cover that task 3.2. Now, the third part that we want to look at is we want to understand, before I go into the third assessment criteria, which is talking about the impact that it has on a chosen organization. What I want to do is understand what is a regulatory framework. Why is regulation important? Now, you regulate or you have a framework because it acts as a model for you to function within a boundary. And sometimes you create these frameworks because they are important to be able to address problems, address issues, and also provide guidelines in terms of how you need to conduct yourself when we look at doing some when you are basically let's put it this way, doing a particular role. So if I work as a IT manager in a company, what I'm trying to do is I'm going to try and follow some sort of a framework to conduct myself and that framework is going to be provided to me around my job description as an example. And my job description will very clearly say that these are the things that I need to do, these are the things that I need to complete, or these are the rules by which I need to adhere to be able to effectively work and function within the organization. So regulatory frameworks over the years have been created within IT, and a lot of governments, international agencies and associations have been created, and they have created these frameworks to develop and also to enact regulation, rules and laws, so that there is a sense of control, there is a sense of transparency, and there is a sense of some sort of a framework which every organization follows when they do when they basically use the IT equipment or networks. Now, example here would be, if I look at the internet. Now, internet has some framework. What is that framework? You are able to create websites or create e-commerce websites by using one regulatory one language, HTML. You look at Java, you look at Apache, and you look at for example, one other language like which allows you to Flash, for example, allows, or JavaScript, which actually allows you to create websites. Now, if this framework is not there, and you code in Linux, I code in some other language, somebody else codes in another language, then what we'll have is issues. When you try and browse the website, it won't render or open up as the way it would, as the way you would want to open it when you launch the browser and trying to browse the website. So in order to have a common framework, in order to have a common ground in terms of how websites are to be created, at some stage, there is a framework which has been created, and this framework, every website developer, every organization, anybody who wants to create a website has to, look at adhering to. So when you look at a consortium, which basically regulates domains, or a association which regulates, primarily website domains, you have some sort of, regulatory provider which creates the compliance or a framework in terms of how the websites are named, what are the extensions that you can get, and these kind of regulatory frameworks are created so that everybody should have what is called an even parity when they use some of the technology. Now, in Learning Outcomes 3, we want to understand what is the impact on a particular organization. The key bit is a chosen organization. So what I've done is I've chosen Ernst & Young, which is one of the big 4 accounting firms, to be able to explain this assessment criteria. Now, just a bit of a brief background. Now, obviously, it's one of the large 4 accounting firms. They offer a lot of IT solutions and services when they offer their products and services. It is one of the organizations which basically also offers consultancy, advisory services in audit, taxation, and IT-related services. It's headquartered, obviously, in the UK, and that's one of the reasons why I've chosen this as an organization to explain. And it has global operations. It has 231,000 employees. It's a very big firm. It is a big turnover as far as revenues are concerned. Now, using this organization, I'm going to explain how you look at legal, regulatory, and ethical issues which they use and obviously comply with when they are giving out services or selling their products and services to customers or their own customers. So one of the things that you look at in that is access mechanism. Now, all the employees in E&Y have a system through which they access sensitive information. Now, when an employee is given the access, this access to information which is confidential or related to the job description that you do within Ernst & Young as a consultant, as an employee, you need to be able to follow this. So one of the codes of conduct is, when most organizations, they say you should change your password every 45 days, which makes it less lenient, and susceptible for that to be hacked, or in this case, have somebody who's not authorized can have access to your data. So access mechanism is something which they've defined in their in their system, wherein they say, if you're given an IT product like a tablet, PC, laptop, Mac, you need to have access to it, and you need to regulate, and follow some of the policies in terms of change your password every 45 days when you use the system. The next is designated ID processes. Now, they have created certain guidelines within the organization through which everyone has to follow. And when they look at following this, they need to be able to understand how this process actually works. So if you have an issue with your laptop, Mac, PC, IT, whatever product they've given you, you have to report that to the IT information desk. and they are the people, technical people, who will actually advise in terms of how it needs to be fixed, if there are issues, bugs, or software updates which need to be done, and they will basically, make those available to you so that you're able to function and use that product effectively. The next is software piracy. Now, E&Y does not allow any software to be installed on their system until unless it's been authorized by a manager. Most of the softwares that they've created use proprietary code, and most of them are on the Microsoft, kind of platform. So they have tie-ups in terms of commercial tie-ups, in terms of licenses. So if a new employee joins, they are straight away able to come in and, obviously use the product, because of the fact that, they need to have what is called, they need to have something which is related to licenses available. So when a new employee joins, the IT department has maybe 200 laptops as inventory. Then somebody joins, they're able to straight away activate the software because they pay a number of, cost for a number of licenses to Microsoft every year under the Microsoft Licensing Act. And they are able to then have soft copy of that software which can be preloaded on any machine, but does not amount to software because they are paying for it, as an organization or as a licensing every year. So, welcome back, Nathan. Now, I was looking at understanding, basically the third assessment criteria wherein you have to choose an organization and show how this implementation of regulatory, legal, and ethical issues in terms of IT are possible within an organization. I've chosen Ernst & Young. Ernst & Young is obviously one of the large core accounting firms in the world globally, like PwC, you have Accenture, and they provide a host of services to various businesses, medium, small, large businesses. And these services they provide are under accounting, advisory, taxation, and IT services. They are headquartered in the UK. They have a large employee base, and it's a fairly large company in terms of its revenue and turnover. Now, what are the issues they face and what they create as regulation is something that I'm going to discuss in assessment criteria. The first such action that I'm going to discuss is access mechanism. What is access mechanism? So when you get an IT equipment, like a laptop is issued to every employee, or a tablet or a phone is issued, they expect that you follow certain IT policy and guidelines when you use the product. The first thing, they ensure that you have to change your password every 45 days, which reduces the risk of hacking because somebody else knows your password, or reduces the risk of data breach because your passwords are changed frequently, and that allows the data, which is confidential data, or the access to the systems that you get because of logging in, are protected at Ernst & Young. The second could be some IT processes which are expected for everyone to follow. And these could be things like, if you have a problem with the hardware, you don't need to troubleshoot yourself. You need to be able to report that problem to an IT help desk, and there a dedicated technical expert or a technical specialist will actually help you to resolve that problem. That could be a software update, it could be a troubleshoot that they have to do with regards to the hardware equipment, but there are policies which have been implemented on the software or on the laptop or the system that you get. And for that, what they expect is, if you have issues, you go to that IT help desk and they will basically, look at updates, reinstalling, fixing, or, a bug or anything which has to be done in terms of a patch, and they will do it for you. The third is software piracy. Now, if you look at an organization like Ernst & Young, they have 231,000 employees. So the IT department has a lot of inventory of software and hardware. Example, they might have 200 laptops in store, at any given point in time, because if an employee joins, a laptop needs to be issued. So the IT department will end up basically, issuing a laptop, but they do not need to physically go out and buy, say, Microsoft Windows, because they have Microsoft Licensing Act, or MALP as we call it, software licensing, and they say, okay, we will procure, say, 50,000 licenses every year, and they buy paper licenses. As long as the royalty and the software cost is being paid, they are able to preload the Windows software on a particular machine and then issue it to an employee. So they are not pirating the software, but because of the agreement they've done with Microsoft and the softwares that they use, they are able to preload that before the laptop is issued to an employee. But that still does not amount to piracy, because they are paying a royalty for the license every time they do an installation of a Microsoft Office or a Microsoft Windows on a particular machine. And last but not the least, in order to ensure that employees, contractors, suppliers, partners members who are part of an organization adhere to all the legal, ethical, and regulatory requirements of IT and IT-related policies within an organization, it is a mandatory responsibility for the organization to train and provide regular training sessions. You look at, and I'll stick to Microsoft here. So if you look at the migration of Windows XP from Windows 2000, then Windows 2007, and you look at Windows 2008 and 2010. Now, there are drastic changes in the software which has happened over the years. Now, when these changes happen, the organization like Ernst & Young has a dedicated IT team which conducts regular training sessions to ensure that the employees understand how the changes are happening, what are the advantages which are coming in the newer version, and how they can use it effectively and become more productive while using the new version of the software. And also, these trainings are done because they try and get issues which they explain that you cannot do this, or this is not allowed, or this is not required to be done. Because if you do these kind of functions or take these actions, that means that you are going to be, breaching certain data rules or rules which have been set in the IT policy, and that allows, maybe the IT equipment which you are using on behalf of Ernst & Young makes it vulnerable to hacking or losing. A simple example that I will give here is sometimes you see when you are issued a company laptop and you are basically traveling with that company laptop. What happens is if you leave it in the train or you leave it or lose it, then the first thing that you have to do is you have to report that to the IT department. And when you report that to the IT department, what happens is, they have the remote access to the software to be able to quickly, data clean, and once it is booted, they can execute a policy or a system that if it gets onto the internet, gets connected to the internet, there is a certain subcode which is required, which basically makes the data, reaching or getting hold of the data impossible for the person who gets hold of it. And these could be because if the person has followed password change policies, has a robust password which cannot be easily broken, and certain other software and bug fixes which are being deployed are there on the machine under the updates, which allows this data to not fall into wrong hands. Now, all this is possible because of the regular trainings which the IT department does, or the updates that the IT department installs remotely on these machines, so that the data and the systems within Ernst & Young are protected, and this is something which cannot fall into the wrong hands. So that bit explains, how a company actually follows regulatory, legal, and ethical issues, when they are looking at dealing with IT-related data. Is that okay? Okay. Any questions on this so far?
No, sir.
Okay. What I'm going to do is I'm going to end the session here, and then I'm going to send you, details, obviously of this presentation. But apart from that, what I'm also going to send you is some free handouts, which are going to be related to each of the assessment criteria for you to read in a bit more detail and get some more knowledge about, what are ethical issues, the laws, say, for example, the regulatory issues, the 10 or 11 laws or acts which have been created in the UK, for you to have a good understanding in terms of how, these issues can be dealt with by following the codes of practices and the guidelines which have been made available over the years to deal with the issues when they happen in the IT sector. Okay. Now, with this, we will conclude our unit because we've covered all the 3 learning outcomes. And I think what I would do next week would be, before we start the next unit, we'll do a bit of discussion on the assignment brief once you've gone through the handouts and the presentations, so that if there are any questions on the assignment brief, when you start to attempt it, we'll discuss that in the next session.
Okay, sir.
Okay. Let me end the session here, Nitin. You have a good weekend, and I'll catch up with you next week on Tuesday.
Okay, sir. Have a nice day. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Take care. Bye for now.
Bye. Bye.